like, are we live? We're live. I'm that person at the beginning of all my streams. It's just like, um, Andrew Pledger, thank you so much for joining me once again for Growing Up Fundie. I'm so excited to have you on my podcast at a live stream this time because I loved having you for an episode, but I feel like a live stream, people just get to see a little bit more of who you are as a person, and I really want everybody to get a chance to meet you. So you are the host of Speaking Up with Andrew Pledger, but you are also releasing a new podcast that's focused on your background and your history with Bob Jones University, and it's called Surviving BJU, a Christian Cult. For people who aren't familiar with Bob Jones, we're going to get into it, but I'm curious, how did you even get there in the first place? From how I know you as a person now, how does somebody like you, very creative, very funny, very outspoken, how do you end up at a place like Bob Jones?
Yes, yeah, that is quite a big question, and it's interesting because my parents graduated from Hiles Anderson, the notorious IFB college in Indiana.
Wow.
And,
That's wild.
for people who don't know me, I grew up in the independent fundamental cult, a fundamental Baptist cult. I was homeschooled my whole life in that environment, found out I was gay as fuck in that environment.
What, you're gay? What? I'm shocked. I am shocked.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say like how an outspoken person like me could end up there. It's interesting because my entire life I was never outspoken. I was always if you ask anyone from my past, from the cult that I grew up in, or from my homeschool group, if they asked to describe me, they would say quiet, shy, really awkward, out of place. That's probably all
Yeah.
the things that people would say. I just didn't fit in anywhere. I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere, not even in my own family. And I knew I was different, but didn't understand why. And like there was no one I could relate to in that environment. And I learned very early on, like I think there were moments of me being outspoken in my childhood, but when you grow up in the IFB, that is not something that is encouraged.
Right.
Basically, the IFB teaches to like hit a child until they submit. So I learned from a very early age not to be outspoken, to just be quiet, to submit, and that speaking up or speaking against or authority would get you in trouble. And, my parents always told me adults are always right, even when they're wrong. And like, you're never supposed to go against authority. So very early on, I'm like, oh, the only way I can survive in this environment is to suppress my opinions, suppress my emotions, just conform, obey, and that's how I was taught to show love, because I was taught, oh, you love God because you obey, you love your parents, so you
Yeah.
automatically obey them.
Right.
And so a lot of my childhood is just full of a lot of religious trauma, a lot of
Yeah.
abuse from my parents. Oh, and just there's so much there, in which I think, I talked a lot about in the earlier episode. But as I got older and started dealing with a lot of mental health issues, I got to the point where at 17 years old, up to that point, I was such an extreme fundamentalist Christian. But at that point, I had done some questioning and realized, at least at that point, that at 17, I wanted to leave the IFB entirely. Like, I wasn't educated on cults. I didn't know about religious trauma. I had found the term spiritual abuse, but I didn't know about trauma in general either. So at that point, I'm like, okay, this environment is toxic and harmful, and I want to leave it. But here I am, born into it, homeschooled my entire life into it, and so afraid to tell my parents that I want to leave it because they see it as the absolute truth, the only way. And, realizing that I'm gay in that environment, and I knew the control wouldn't stop when I graduated from being homeschooled, because my parents would only help me go to a Fundie college.
Right.
And my parents wanted me to go to Pensacola Christian College. Oof. Yes,
Is that worse than BJU?
it is. Yeah, believe it or not. Yeah, it
What are
is.
they like? What are they known for? What's their brand?
So Number one, Pensacola Christian College produced the homeschooling curriculum I grew up on.
Oh no.
Yes, a Becca curriculum.
Oh no. And that's like they teach like young earth creationism and stuff, don't they?
Hmm.
Oh no. Wow. So,
Yes.
question for somebody who's been not only homeschooled but homeschooled religious, do you ever find out about stuff now that you're an adult where you're like, "Holy shit, I had no idea that was the truth this whole time." Like it didn't even occur to you that it was incorrect, or are you pretty much like up to speed with the world?
I am I
Yeah.
am not up to speed, and like it is something I'm still catching up on, and it's hard because when you've been homeschooled in that environment, you really experience educational neglect.
Yes.
And
That's such
it's
a good
some
way to put it. Yeah.
I mean I still have so much shame about it because I'm so behind, and I am like an avid reader. I love reading. So I am
Right.
trying to get myself. I try to read. I usually read one book a week, but
Wow.
yeah, I not always, but I've been okay. I'm about to catch up to that this year, but I just finished my bachelor's, so it's been harder to.
Yeah, I was gonna say you literally just graduated like 2 weeks ago, if
Yes,
even, maybe 1 week ago. Like
a
it's
few weeks
okay if you
ago.
don't read
Yeah.
a full book a week just yet. You just finished your degree.
Yeah. But yeah, I love learning different perspectives because growing up, I wasn't allowed to do that. I remember when I finally at 17 was able to order stuff from Amazon and my dad realized I bought books that questioned fundamentalist Christianity, he took them away from me. So just
Wow.
all that control. So now to be able to read from all different kinds of perspectives has been great, but I'm trying to have compassion because I'm like, okay, like I experienced educational neglect for 18 years of
Yeah,
my life.
right. There's so much catching up to do.
There's
By the
so
way,
much.
Deep Drinks is here. He says hi. I was just telling Andrew about you, Deep Drinks. Deep Drinks. I was just telling you about
Oh,
Andrew. Meet each other. Hello. Definitely
hello.
think you should collab.
I would love to
Um,
collab.
but yeah, it's wild that part of like this thing that we see repeatedly in fundamentalist culture is keeping people as undereducated as possible, because if they're undereducated they either won't question what we're telling them, or they won't feel like they're smart enough to question what we're telling them. They won't feel like they're as intelligent as us, and so they'll just do what they're supposed to do, keep their head down, trust us as the educational authority, and maintain the status quo, which is just awful. And it's nothing that you should feel ashamed about, but I completely understand where that shame would come from.
Hmm.
Was college,
Yes.
mainstream college, difficult for that reason because you felt behind?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I did struggle in the beginning a lot at Bob Jones, and I remember thinking that like for like most of my college career, probably like 2 years of it, I thought I was just so dumb and I struggled so much, um and the thing was I didn't have a comparison to what it was like to function in a healthy environment. So it was shocking to me when I left Bob Jones and transferred schools how quickly my grades went up when I
Isn't that
was
wild?
in a healthy environment. I'm like, oh, I'm not dumb. I just have complex PTSD or religious trauma, and my brain is so fucked up that it just.
Yeah, like, I'm not dumb, I just don't like being watched 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and spied on by my peers for, like,
Hmm.
heaven points. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's crazy.
And so I think one thing I will say, I feel like the homeschooling that I ended up doing, I felt prepared with writing and reading. That's what I was really good at.
That's
But
good.
critical thinking, oh,
Yeah.
so sad. I'm still working on that one a lot.
But I mean, you're headed in such a right direction. For it's interesting to me because you say I'm still working on my critical thinking skills, and on my side, you have multiple podcasts. You have a Facebook page that is always popping off with like articles, opinion pieces, think pieces, like and I can tell that your brain is spinning like a million miles a minute. You just got a degree and you're concerned that your critical thinking skills are dull. And to me, like, it doesn't look like that on this end, I can tell you. The content that
Oh,
you
thank
produce is
you.
not lacking critical thinking. You're
Yeah.
making up for lost time, certainly.
Yes. And like that is the powerful thing about my Speaking Up with Andrew Pleasure podcast is I've been able to interview experts. I've been able to interview people with different philosophical or religious beliefs, or even people who call themselves Christians, but don't practice the beliefs that I was raised with at all. And it's been interesting to hear their take on it
Yeah.
and kind of open my mind to that. And like, I think that's why I love it. I love speaking up so much. Is really for me, it's like all the connections that I
Yeah.
make and the
Yeah.
people that I get to meet. I love it. And I don't have to leave my bedroom like
I
introvert.
know.
Uh,
Isn't that wonderful? You can stay home all day long. Are they wearing pants? Will we ever know? Who knows? Optional. Yeah, that's
yeah.
amazing.
So
So,
sorry, you go on.
oh no, I was just gonna say, so your choices were Bob Jones or a worse place than Bob Jones,
Okay,
basically.
here's the thing. My parents wanted me to go to Pensacola, and for me, I'm like, if I'm gonna be forced to a Fundie college, it has to be accredited because I knew that if I went to PCC, I would be stuck in the IFB movement because that's you can only get hired in those environments when you get this shitty degree from them.
Yeah, I can't even imagine being like, hear me out, just hear me out, guys. I really feel like my school should be accredited. I just feel like that should be something
And
that we
like
focus on.
here's the thing with Pensacola. I don't know if they do it anymore, but I know when my oldest brother, he graduated from there and worked there for a while, and he's in the IFB as a youth pastor. That's fun. Um, but they did this deal where they're like, hey, like if you go to Pensacola 4 years straight, the fourth year is free.
Okay, but I don't know. That's
Red
like getting
flag.
something free. Well, to me, it's like that's getting something free from Shein. Like, okay, but it's still gonna fall apart. Like, it's still not gonna last whether I pay $5 or not. Like, thank you. But like lacking of value and substance is still lacking of value and substance, whether it's free or not.
Yes, and so that and when I was looking at Pensacola, it was like $10,000 a year.
Wow,
That's so cheap for
that
college, and
is
like you get what you pay for, you know?
totally. Well, and it's also like it's not accredited. You
No.
know, like if you get $10,000 accredited university, it's like wow. But like that degree is not going to pay itself back.
Mm-mm. No. And so and the thing was, when I started looking at Pensacola's rules, number one, when I was looking into it at the time in like 2017, 2018-ish, you could not leave campus during the day without signing out and telling someone where you were going, what time you would be there, and what time you would be back, and if you were going with anyone, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no. And number two, they had a campus church, or really, I mean, that place is a cult, but this campus church that you were forced to go to. You couldn't go to any churches in the community at Pensacola Christian College. So I was like, you're literally in prison on this campus.
You can't even go to a local church. You have to go to the school
Yeah.
church.
Yeah. When I was looking at it, yes.
And that's always been interesting to me too is within Christianity how it's almost worse to be the wrong type of Christian than to not be a Christian at all. Like it's almost a bigger sin to go to the wrong church or be a part of the wrong faith than to just say that you don't believe in God at all. And that's kind of reminiscent of that where you're like what's so bad about the local churches?
And I mean, really, it's all about that control.
Deep Drink says my ministry college certificate was signed by a guy who wrote anti-LGBT stuff into school contracts. I made a video about it and was interviewed by SBS Australia about it. What a scumbag. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Well, and
Oof.
certificate, right? Like that's basically what
Certificate.
right, like certificate is what you would get there. Wow.
Yeah. And so when I saw all this, I was like, it's like I'm living under my parents' house. Like,
Yeah.
and
At least there
so,
you didn't have to sign out.
and so when I looked into Bob Jones University, they were accredited. That was a big plus for me. Oof. And so I was like, there we go, accredited. And, it's funny because I had never really heard of Bob Jones growing up. I maybe heard I never heard of the school, but I heard of the preacher because my pastor would quote him like, do right till the stars fall. I can still hear him saying it in my mind. He said it so much.
What
Yeah.
do you think that means? Just putting your, like, it's beautiful and it sounds like it belongs on a tramp stamp for sure. But I don't know that I know what that means.
But like the Fundie, like from a social justice perspective, it would sound really nice. But from the Fundie perspective, it's like follow this strict moral code perfectly until you fucking die.
Until you drop dead. Whoa. That's wild. And I just realized something. A certificate maybe, is that a degree in Australia? That might be. Here, a certificate is not the same
Oh,
as a
that's
degree.
awkward.
Yeah,
Oof.
so maybe like, well, is that a degree or is that like accredited? Let us know. Because I don't know. Because here, if you got a certificate, it wouldn't mean the same thing. But I just realized the translation may be different. You may
That's
have,
true.
he may have a really high degree in ministries. I don't know. But that's wild. And so he's saying like, do the Lord's work until you drop dead.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
okay, so it's not as high as a degree. Okay, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking it was the same, like community college. Interesting. And so when you told your parents, you're like, I want to go to this school instead, were they upset about it? Were they glad that you picked a place? What were their
Yeah.
thoughts?
It was interesting because like I was still like so dreading even going there still. And when and I think is something my parents had kind of brought up as maybe a possibility. And when they started researching and we started researching into it more, they became upset that Bob Jones University no longer took the KJV only stance, which is prevalent in the IFB movement. Like the King James version is the absolute truth, the only legitimate word of God. All of their versions are false and influenced by Satan. That's what they believe in that environment. And the fact that Bob Jones didn't take that stance anymore, that was just like a lot for them. And
Interesting.
so in their eyes, Bob Jones was like heading in the direction of being liberal just because
I
they
was going to
didn't.
say that sounds like a liberal arts school to them, probably.
Yes, and like Bob Jones is a liberal arts school. Like it identifies itself that like a Christian liberal arts school, not liberal in the political
Right.
sense, but like the academic of like you get all these different general education classes in addition to your major.
Interesting.
And so when basically, and like another thing was my parents were so worried about their reputation because my mom was freaking out. She's like, what am I going to tell people at church? Oh my God, I'm so worried about what are they going to think that you're going to Bob Jones. And it was because my Bob Jones, it had several IFB colleges that it tried to push everyone to go to. And Bob Jones was not one of them. It was Pensacola, Hiles-Anderson, West Coast, Crown College, Tennessee Temple.
I've literally never heard of a place that thought Bob Jones was too liberal. This is like blowing my mind.
That's how extreme the church cult that I grew up in really was. And so it was not on that list of like the churches they wanted try to get people to go to. And so they were just really stressed. And at first it almost seemed like they maybe might not let me even go to Bob Jones. And in their minds, this is how they justified it. They're like, Andrew, they're like, since you're going to Bob Jones, to really like seek a career and, you're not going to be in the ministry, we're okay with you going. But they're like, if you're going to be a ministry major or in biblical counseling, we would not want you to go to that school.
So, oh man, that's like, I have so many questions. Do you think they thought that you were going to learn like too much information and no longer be enough Christian? Like, do you think they thought you were just going to learn too much, or what do you think they thought was going to happen there?
I think
because like men and women can't even like commingle most of the time there.
I think in their minds, they saw the IFB as the only way and the correct form of Christianity. It's the absolute truth. They had the exact perfect interpretation. And anything that strayed out of that, I think in their eyes was seen as maybe of influence of Satan, or maybe something that kind of veered me away from God. And it was interesting because I talked to my oldest brother at Pensacola. I'm like, yeah, I'm like, on Wikipedia, it says they're a non-denominational Christian college. And I thought that was strange because I thought they were fundamentalists because they have a
They're
pastor that,
so fundamentalist. Like,
yes. And so my brother's like, he's like, oh, non-denominational. He's like, oh, you have to be careful at that place, Andrew. Be really careful. They're so worried. And I got there and it was so fucking fundamentalist. Like, it's such a
so fundamentalist. Like,
still so strict, still so
in my
awful.
mind, it was the most fundamentalist school I'd ever heard of until right now. Like, until
Mhm.
today. I'm learning that there's more than that's crazy. Like, I know people who got kicked out because they were seen in a group with the opposite gender, even though there was like 6 or 7 people in the group at a Pizza Hut.
Mhm.
Like, that's crazy. Deep Drink says, it's so strange to me that faith needs so much protection.
That's a red flag, honestly. And that's what kind of, there were so many things that made me question. And I think the one thing that, and I love saying this is what saved me from religion and from fundamentalist Christianity was my sexuality, because I had to deal with that cognitive dissonance of my experience not matching what they taught about sexuality. So then once that gets into your mind and you're like, oh my gosh, they're wrong about this thing, and it opens up a can of worms, or it knocks down the house of cards of like, what else are they wrong about?
Yeah.
Like, now I can
Yeah.
question the whole system. And so for me, I think it started with my sexuality and then kind of like mental health issues. Like, they were giving me the answer for what was supposed to heal my mental health issues, but it
Yeah.
wasn't working. And I was blamed and shamed for that. So it's like, okay, well, insanity is doing the same thing over and over. Y'all are telling me to do the same thing over and over. This is not working. Y'all clearly don't know what the fuck y'all are talking about. Like,
Right.
it's just,
Well, and I'm trying to picture a world in which telling people you're going to Bob Jones University makes them worried about your salvation. Like, that's crazy. That's like, I highly encourage anybody listening to this to just Google Bob Jones, just read about it, just learn about it,
yes.
because like
And
it's
oof,
unreal.
I am making a podcast series that covers Bob Jones University, and let me tell you, there is so much. It's been honestly really hard to research it because there were so many things that I even like. I thought I knew a lot about Bob Jones University, but as I've been doing more and more research, and I've been working with a scholar in fundamentalism who's helping me research this for the podcast, I just want this. I hope the podcast will help the school shut down immediately. Like, I hope students will stop going there. I hope people will
Yeah.
transfer. It's just, it's a terrible, awful school, and they've abused so many students. And this scholar that I was talking with, I don't have the numbers on this, but they were like, yeah, they're like, there have been a lot of BJU grad like suicides since the like pandemic. And I recently, I have 2 cult experts coming on the show and I gave them my analysis, my cult analysis of Bob Jones, and like they had a lot to say about Bob Jones University. And one cult expert, which is the one I work for, her name is Rachel Bernstein. She's been a cult expert for 30 years. The other one I had come on the podcast, her name is Daniela Mestinek Young. People will probably know her best from TikTok, and she's also the writer of the memoir Uncultured. And
Yeah.
she grew up
And
in
I
the
do have that book. I think I told you last time we talked about it. I was like, I
yes,
think I have that book. I do. I have it.
and she grew up in the Children of God sex cult, and she escaped that and ended up in the military, which he has now called out as another cult.
I was gonna say,
that she
which
got.
is another cult.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, and she. Like, it was really hit me hard because on TikTok she was, she's been doing videos on Bob Jones, which I'm so happy about because she has like, I think like around like 50,000 followers. So she's helping bring
Yeah.
awareness to Bob Jones. And she said, I'm curious about the suicide rate of people who go there. And I'm like, fuck. And it really hit me hard because, I had a lot of mental health struggles at Bob Jones, and I was pushed to the point of being suicidal and nearly taking my own life there. And I was
Yeah.
thankfully able to call a hotline and get help, but it just got really, really bad. And it just, wow, that just hit me hard when she said that, because like, oh, I was almost one of those people. It's
Yeah. Omni Kevlar says, I'm glad you recognize the harm in what they were teaching you. When I wasn't able to faith heal anyone rather than critically assess the moment, I assumed God was
mm,
mad at me. Man,
um,
that's real.
and yeah, I definitely felt that for a while when I was indoctrinated. But like, thankfully, I think I just slowly, somehow, because of my sexuality, just started kind of like going off the Kool-Aid and just started to become disillusioned, I think, in that environment. And so, yeah, so Bob Jones, like, no one has ever made a podcast that just covers Bob Jones University. And so when I realized that, I was like, someone needs to do that.
Yeah. So for anybody listening who may be unfamiliar, what are a couple examples of what you went through at Bob Jones that gave you like trauma and that made you suicidal for
Mm,
people who like maybe they're unfamiliar, they don't know what you experienced there?
mm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I relate to this with a lot of other survivors, is that we come to this school already traumatized from very strict fundamentalist Christian backgrounds, and then we come into another abusive and controlling environment, and we're triggered a lot, and this we have more trauma added on to what the baggage we already have. And so for me, I think specifically just as a gay person going to Bob Jones University, going in there, I remember just being afraid for my safety, honestly, because I wasn't sure how it was going to be. I'm like, am I literally going to be hate crime the moment I step onto this
Yeah,
campus?
literally.
And I think for me, especially when you're in a high control religion or you're in a cult, you feel so isolated. And I was creating videos from the podcast that I work for. This episode is not out yet, so I'm kind of doing a little spoiler here, but it's an episode with a cult expert. Her name is Alexandra Stein, and she started talking about the forms of isolation in a cult, and it's something I hadn't like thought of cohesively together in this way, and it just really emotionally hit me hard, and it just was just kind of like an aha moment for me. But she talked about like there were three types of isolation that you experience when you're in a high control group, high control religion, or in a cultic environment. Number one, there's isolation from people outside a cult. So, you can't have contact with people on the outside, people who believe differently than you. Number two, you're isolated from people on the inside because you cannot express what you are truly feeling or experiencing. And number three, you're isolated from yourself because you're cut off from your internal thoughts and your body, because you're taught not to trust yourself and that you're evil and that you're just supposed to submit to this doctrine. So all these areas of isolation. So I think being isolated and lonely was like the first part of that. As human beings, if we do not have like true belonging and true social connection, like,
We're pack animals. If we're
yes.
isolated from other animals, it's depressing and it's sad and it's harmful and it's unhealthy and we die. We literally die without socialization, especially with like familial socialization and physical contact. So this idea that like not only were you isolated, but like it was frowned upon and you were punished for physical contact with any other human beings. Like that's going
Mm-hmm.
against human nature in general,
Mm-hmm.
let alone your personal thoughts and feelings. That's
Mm-hmm.
and so when you were going through it, did you know it was wrong? Or did you think like you were just weaker? Tea Drink says, I'm no animal. You that's funny. You may believe you are a monkey, not me. And we're all apes. We're all apes.
Sorry, what was the
Amphibians.
question?
Oh, I was saying when you were going through it at the time, did you know like this is wrong, like this isn't right, this shouldn't be happening, or did you feel like it was your personal weakness that made it difficult to survive?
Yeah, I mean, in the being there, knowing that you're unacceptable, I mean, I felt, and I think I felt this my entire life, like not belonging, feeling inferior, I guess, to other people, and not worthy of love or connection in a sense, I think. And because we were honestly taught that.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
we were taught that we weren't deserving of love. And in that environment, I especially my freshman year, I experienced a lot of harassment from a lot of jockey type guys. I was followed around by these guys at campus, like name calling. And so here I am on this campus, afraid, and people are harassing me. And again, when you're at Bob Jones, you cannot trust anyone because
Right.
you don't know who actually believed this or who's faking it. Like
Right.
at Bob
Or like
Jones,
if I make fun of this kid and call him gay, nobody will notice that maybe I'm gay too, or like nobody will notice that I'm struggling with my feelings too.
yes,
I'll
that's
put all the
true.
blame on him. Yeah.
That's so true. And yeah, and so at that university, you feel like you can't trust anyone. And they have this snitching system in place where if you see someone breaking a rule and you don't report them, and and it's found out that they get in trouble, and someone found out that you get in trouble, and it's just as bad as if you broke the rule yourself. So it creates this culture of constantly snitching on people, and people who snitch are rewarded. And we have a name for those people at Bob Jones. They're called Boges, and they're people who love to follow the rules. They think they're better than everyone else because they follow the rules, and they snitch on anyone and everyone, and they actively seek that out. Like it's a high for these people.
Do they get reward of any kind for it?
Mainly just sucking up to
Yeah.
leadership, and eventually these people ended up working at Bob Jones University, most of them.
Oh, what a treat. What a treat. They can have it. I'm so sad, but they can have it. I know that I lost that opportunity.
Yeah.
Wild. So, and this whole time, so you're going to this school where you don't feel safe because of your sexuality, and you don't feel like the Bible is basically taking care of you or teaching you the tools that you need to exist and not want to kill yourself. And at the same time, everybody back home is like, he's going to that liberal school. Like, I hope he doesn't lose his salvation because he's going to that. That's wild to me.
Yeah.
Like, you're suffering more than
Yeah.
lot of people I've ever heard suffer with their college experience because you went to such a strict conservative religious college. And even in that regard, you couldn't even measure up. You couldn't even measure up to strict religious college enough. You weren't suffering enough. You needed to go to one that was unaccredited. You were too busy earning college credits. How dare you? Like,
Yeah. And so like I don't know if my parents I think they got better as my career went on about me going, because I think strangely, I think my mom tuned into a lot of the chapel sermons, which they were really awful, very similar to the IFB. So I think in the beginning that in their minds they did have that word, but I think it got better for them as it kind of went on. And the thing is, like, it's so hard when I could get back, and like there were, especially like I feel like freshman year, there were moments where I expressed to my parents that I hated going to that college, and they could tell that I was so unhappy, so miserable, so depressed.
did they ever say anything like, you should have gone to this other one or like told you so, or were they genuinely concerned?
Um, they didn't say told you so. They didn't like my family, we never talked about emotions or anything. It was just like this attitude of like, oh yeah, life's hard, deal with it. Like it doesn't matter what you're going through. Blah. And so no emotions were ever validated. We never talked or worked through things, and it was just hard because like I would come back from Bob Jones back in the IFB, and it's like if I left Bob Jones, here I am back under my parents' roof, still indoctrinated, still going into the like being in the IFB. And so for me, I was like, okay, if I can suck it up all of these like 4 years, I can get the degree that I need that's accredited, and I can get a job outside of this environment, create a life of my own, and eventually like leave it all behind. Just in my mind, it's like just 4 more years, Andrew.
Yeah.
Just deal with it. Do whatever you can to do it. And so the first semester I was there, I tried to follow every single rule because I was so scared of getting in trouble. And just for people to understand what it's like to go there.
It's not like normal college rules at
It's
all.
not. No, you're not allowed to listen to secular music. You're not even allowed to listen to contemporary Christian music. No TV above like PG, basically, or PG-13, which PG-13 is not a TV rating, but basically you can't watch TV above a PG rating. No movies above a PG-13 rating. No physical contact between opposite genders. You cannot be alone. And if you're alone on campus, it has to be in a well-lit space where everyone can see you. Or you have to be like in a crowded area and in like the student lounge, the dining area or something. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, and here's the thing about Bob Jones is that as if you went to Bob Jones and you lived out of state and you were between the ages of 18 to 22, you were required to live in their dorm. And when you lived in the dorm, you were under a very authoritarian hierarchical leadership structure where you were constantly monitored. Now, in the dorms, the person at the top leader is the dorm supervisor. And underneath the dorm supervisor is a dorm mentor. The dorm supervisor, all the demerits usually end up to him, and you have to meet with him. And, he'll send all that stuff to student life, which student life is the part of which student life, it sounds nice, but it's not.
It does. It sounds so pleasant, but you're like,
It's not. It's if you're at student life, it is a very bad day for you.
Yeah.
At Bob Jones University. These are the people that love handing out demerits. They punish people you send your church attendance to them, which I'll get to in a second. But in this dorm, it was a dorm supervisor, dorm mentor, and then residence assistants were under them. There were one on each floor. There were 3 floors in each dorm. Then underneath the residence assistants were discipleship group leaders, which we had several or many on each floor. And then underneath the discipleship group leaders were assistant discipleship group leaders, which were many more on each floor. So you're always watched, and you can't go back from your class and go back to your dorm and feel comfortable and safe and kick back and relax. Yeah. And at Bob Jones University, they always kept you so busy. In addition to going to college classes, doing homework, doing extracurriculars, working a job to save for college. And here are all the required activities we had. We had to go to chapel several days a week. Probably, I think it was like 4 days a week. There was just a little period where it was a sermon, a worship service, and we would say the BJU Creed in unison as a whole student body.
Definitely not a cult, for sure. Definitely not.
That when the first time when I was at Bob Jones and I was in chapel and we all said the creed in unison, it sent chills like through all of me.
Can I ask what the creed is, or is that like, is it triggering to?
Don't ask.
Okay, no, ask.
Don't ask. And the thing is, I don't even remember it anymore, because we would say it so many times, but eventually, like I would disassociate.
Yeah.
I would my mind was like, and that's how I survived, honestly. Disassociation, my trauma, that's my main trauma response is disassociation. And it's something I'm working to not do anymore so I can enjoy my present life, but it saved me during that period. And so I'm trying to remember at the top of my head, it's like, oh, what is it? I believe in the inspiration of the Bible, the Old and the New Testament, the creation of man by the direct act of God, the incarnation and virgin birth of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. That's kind of where I forgot, but something about the redemption of God, him dying, raising from the dead, being saved through the Holy Ghost, blah, blah, blah. Just all the fundamentals, basically. Yeah.
All the fundamentals. Sorry. We've talked about this before. We laugh because we're traumatized. That's what makes it so funny. We can laugh.
And so we would say that every time. And so in addition to chapel, we would have to join a society, which a society is the Christian version of a sorority or a fraternity, except it's not fun, it's not cool
I was gonna
at
say there's
all.
no such thing. It doesn't sound fun or cool at all.
It's not, but that's the way I describe it so people can understand. And it was basically just like chapel, but student led and in smaller groups that you would choose. And so you would meet in this one designated room every semester. You would have like
I'm
announcements.
guessing they're separated men and women, probably.
Oh,
No.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. And we would sing a song. There would be announcements. There would be a little sermon. So just like chapel, but students.
Yay. Yeah.
And then like the one thing that was different was that they would maybe have like a little game the last like 5 to 10 minutes, like towards the end.
Like a
And
netball game, or is it something that's gonna like scare me?
here's the funny thing. When I visited different societies, there were some that were like so wild and crazy. Like there were some that were like toxic masculinity shit. Like the first one I went to, it was called the Rams, and they punched a hole in the wall.
I mean, it fits, honestly, like on brand. Like
It
I guess I
is.
shouldn't be that surprised.
And we were playing a game where we were all throwing toilet paper at each other. And I was so scared, like gay, shy little me, like hiding, like like please. That like people throwing toilet paper. And I tried to leave the classroom because I was just, and also like I'm a
It's
very
too
like
much.
I'm a highly sensitive person, which I think it has to do with trauma.
Oh
But
yeah. Yeah.
very sensitive nervous system. And I tried to leave, and like this guy like grabbed me. He's like, "You can't leave the room. Like you're not allowed." And I was like, "Shit!" So I had to like stand by the door. Couldn't leave the room. It's
But
not
what was gonna
allowed.
happen to you if you left, do you think? They would just like talk too much
Demerits.
shit?
They report me and to
Oh,
student
you would get
life.
demerits for that?
Yeah, probably like I don't know how many I would get for that because like at Bob Jones, if you skipped a required event, I think it was 25 demerits.
Wow, that's wild. Also,
Oh my gosh, Stacy, I love you. I'm so glad you're watching this. I'm at work, but taking a quick break and saw my sweet. Oh, hi. I'm sending love to you too. Oh, love you.
agnostacy. Oh,
Yeah.
apostasy. I said agnostasy. Agnostic apostasy. Agnostasy. You should
No,
use that if you don't, Stacey.
she is an atheist, so yeah,
Yeah.
she's not agnostic at all. But
Yeah.
yeah, I
It
think
doesn't
I
fit,
confused
but
that.
it came out of my mouth anyway. It doesn't work though. That's like there's like a Wario version of you out there, Stacy, that's agnostacy. That's who that is. That's like your like alter ego. um
I love
so
it.
you would get demerits for leaving just an extracurricular activity.
Oh, yeah, sorry, a required activity.
So you had to join a group.
Yes.
Wow. And like were you allowed to pick which one you, because it sounds like kind of like Greek where maybe you got to try each one
It
out a
is.
little bit, but you
Yes.
still had to stay the whole time? You still lost points?
Yeah, and that was the interesting thing is each time these societies met, you would have to pick one to visit during that time. So I think they gave us 2 weeks to visit all these different societies. And then there would be like a Greek rush type thing where they would all run down this track and field and you would run after them and then you would be initiated, which that would like hazing incidents that would happen.
Also
Yeah.
running, not my vibe. Not my vibe. I would automatically get demerits. I'd be like, listen, you don't know me. I don't like running. This is not my thing.
And like the society that I chose when I was looking for one, I'm like, what is the most lame society I could find where people won't give a shit about me and I can stay under the radar and they won't make me do anything? And also, all the other people in the society don't give a fuck and don't care and don't want to be there. And that's, I found it. It was called the Wolves, and no one gave a fuck. No one, literally, when I told people on campus what society I was in, they're like, I didn't know that was a society. Like, no one knew who we were.
That's
Just so
great.
nice. And so I was like, yeah, stay low key. And yeah, so I absolutely, that was terrible. And I stayed low key for a while, but there's this one annoying ass leader who had the same name as me, which is so annoying. Same first name. It was so annoying. And he's like, I want to change the society. We need to all get involved. And like he
You're
would
like, "Are you new
go.
here,
I'm
sir?"
like, did you not catch the vibes at all?
Yeah.
Like we don't
Excuse me.
care.
Right, like, this is literally study hall. This is what we're just here to sit around and talk and not be involved.
And that's the
Ew.
thing, like, we were all so socially awkward too, and, like, there were some people, like, for me, like, I felt like that awkward homeschooler, but there were some people I'm like, "Oh my god." I would be like, "I thought I was awkward," and I'm, like, seeing other people, and I'm like, "Oh my god." And it made it
Wow.
it was sad though because, like, I related, and I was like, "These poor individuals who are not prepared to be in society in any way are then thrown into this environment, which isn't gonna help them function in the world
Right? That's
anyways."
definitely not gonna prepare them for society, not at all.
No.
That's wild. And when you were checking out these groups, did you meet anybody else where you're like, "I think they are also gay." Like, I think like, or were you just mostly focused on protecting yourself?
Yeah, I mean, there were some people where I saw around campus where I'm like, "Oh, wow," mage like, my gaydar would just, like, go way off, and I would be like and the thing is, though, like, you don't know if that person accepts her sexuality because there are
Right.
some people there that are gay, but they renounce it, and they're in
Right.
counseling, and they think it's an evil thing they have to, like, get rid of, so it's like you don't know if they accept themselves or not, and
Right.
if they're
It's not
and
something you'd ever approach them about or anything like that.
yeah, like, so worried about that. So for me, like, I would see that, but I'm like, "Yeah," I'm like, "I don't know if that's safe." So I would be like and again, when I went to this college, it was a student body of, like, 2,500 students, and there was only one person there that I knew that came from the church cult that I grew up in, and I didn't really know them that well, but I wanted to, like, be in an environment where no one would know me at all.
Right.
So it was nice
Right.
that majority of those people had no idea. None of my family had gone to Bob Jones, so I could stay low key. And so, but it was hard to stay low key when you had all these required activities. So I mentioned discipleship groups earlier, which were on the dorm floor and their assistants. If you were a campus student, living in the dorms, you were required to be in a discipleship group, and you were assigned to a group based automatically, just based on the dorm room you were in. There were usually like 3 to 4 dorm rooms. That was a discipleship group, and there were usually 2 to 3 people in each dorm room. So maybe at most 12 people in a group, just cramped in this room meeting. And this was when I was there, it was several nights a week, usually from like 10:30 to 11.
That's
And
so late.
I know, like I would rather
Wow.
be studying or sleeping or literally anything else. And I, oh my God, it just slipped my mind. It was there, brain
Oh,
fart.
yeah, we were just talking about how, like, it was hard to stay low key when they're forcing you to go to all these mandatory events, apparently literally until almost midnight some nights. That's wild.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah.
So looking back, I didn't realize this. Oh no, sorry. When this happened, I didn't realize it. But looking back, I'm like, ugh, like that's really culty. But Bob Jones University would create, or really the president would write this special devotional booklet that was just meant for Bob Jones students. It wasn't distributed to the public or sold publicly. It was just this little booklet that he made that covered every single chapel sermon he was going to do that semester. And you would go over this booklet each disciples that we were supposed to go over this booklet each meeting. And the different discipleship groups I was in, we didn't always do that, which was great. There was one group that I was in that he was really strict for us to like fill out this booklet and go through it every week. It was so annoying. But it was that continuing of indoctrination of what we're hearing in chapel. And it was so awful because it was usually very shallow preaching. It wasn't really deep theologically. Like, I would have been interested to learn more about theology, honestly, just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
But it was just like these basic ass, like, do this, live your life this way. This is what God wants you to do. How do you feel about
Yeah.
that? Are you doing this?
Yeah.
Are you?
Yeah. Like, how are you feeling? And you better be feeling great about it, FYI.
And if you're
Do you
not, you're evil. You don't have the Holy Spirit in you. You're not saved.
do you feel that inside you? That's doubt. That's Satan. That's you. That's in your body. Do you that got weird.
Inside.
ASMR, Satan. Do you ever feel like if they hadn't been nearly as strict, if it had been one of those like we offer sermons, we offer theological discussion, but nothing is forced and nothing is like people aren't spying on you, do you ever think that you would still be religious? Do you feel like your
Mhm.
exit was expedited because of the insane control, or do you think it was well on its way, that just didn't help at all?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. And
If they'd been like, hey, here's, here's a thing you can go to if you want, where we're going to listen to this preacher talk, and he's got a TikTok and he's fun.
I feel like if the environment would have been like that, there might have been a possibility that I would have ended up maybe being a progressive Christian and then eventually maybe ending that, because I did explore progressive Christianity secretly for a while I was there, but it just got to the point where it's like I can be a good person without this. I don't need this. I don't see a point to this.
Yeah, there's a point when, in order to progress any further, you have to get rid of some of the fundamentals of Christianity, at least
Mhm.
like American, fundamentalist and evangelical
Yeah.
Christianity. Like there comes to a certain point where you can't really call yourself like liberal or like accepting or those things and still follow a lot of the rules that you're supposed to follow to keep that
Yeah.
title.
Mhm. Correct. And yeah, it was interesting because there's all the other control that they had. We were forced to go to church twice a week, and we had a list of churches we had to choose from that were Bob Jones approved with their theology and all throughout it. And the dorms, when I was there, they were swept every Sunday morning to make sure we're all out. And I remember like my freshman year, it was like my first time skipping church, and it was on an accident. I had slept in, my roommates were gone, they were at church, and I hear the residence assistant checking every single room. I hear the doors open, close, open, close. So I wake up and I hear them checking, and I'm like, in like 30 seconds, this RA is going to come in my room. I'm not supposed to be in here, because the only way you could be in the dorms on Sunday morning was if you were sick and you told them the night before, or you sent them an email, I'm sick and I have to stay in. And so here I am, who's been a people pleaser and a rule follower my whole life. I'm like, okay, I'm like, this person is coming here any second. What do I do? And so I'm on the top of the bunk. I push my mattress out a little bit from the wall, and I slide between the wall and the mattress, and I cover myself with a blanket. And a few seconds later, the door of my dorm room opens, and I'm holding my breath, trying so hard not to make noise, not to breathe too loudly. And I hear it, and and in my mind, I'm like, please don't notice that this mattress is shoved like a foot farther than it's supposed to be. Please don't notice, there might be a lump kind of still there.
Yeah.
And so when it was just, I think it was like, it was in the room for probably like 10 to 15 seconds. It didn't feel that long, then it felt like forever. But he left, and I'm like, oh. And I got out, and I was like, I just broke a rule.
But also, like, it's like a funny story, but at the same time, I'm like, this is some wartime shit. This is some like hiding from the enemy, like as like it's a great story. Like the imagery is hilarious, but then I realized like you were put in a position where if an RA saw you
Mhm.
accidentally oversleep and miss church, first of all, why isn't the RA in church? What are they doing? What makes them so great that they can skip church? But that's beyond me. But also there's going to be like such serious repercussions for you that you literally had to hide behind your mattress, between your mattress and the wall.
And
What?
I'm an adult in fucking college.
You're
Like,
paying to be there. Like you're paying to be there. That's wild. Um
yes.
Also secular rarity is here. Hello secular
Oh,
rarity. You're
hello.
late. You're late. Demerit for you. Demerit for secular rarity. Um but that's just wild. Yeah, exactly. He says it starts with missing church, and the next thing you know, you're eating babies and fornicating with everyone. Excuse me. first of all, you missed the part where you become a liberal. It starts with missing church, then you become a liberal, then the next thing you're eating babies, fornicating. Don't forget the abortions. We love those. That's what happened. So honestly, that's a good thing that they were checking to make sure you were in church every day. That's wild. And so then you had to leave Bob Jones.
Oof. Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, how much longer do we have?
I'll have to let my dad into my apartment at one point, and then we can keep going. So, like, at one point, I might have to turn off my camera, and you can keep going, keep telling your story, keep telling everybody in the
Okay,
chat.
got you.
Whenever he texts me, I have to go unlock my front
Okay.
door, but then we can
Yeah,
keep going
because
however long you want.
there's a few more things I want to dig into with the control, and I know I spent a little too long on stories, but it's really interesting.
Keep going. I'll go unlock the door right now while you're telling them about it.
Got
And then
you.
I'll be back in 10 seconds.
Yeah, this is fun. Okay. So for me, when I started continuing to break rules, it was really hard for me because I still had that indoctrination where if you break a rule and disobey authority, that's seen as disobeying God and God's going to punish you for that. And I was always told growing up that obeying authority means you'd live a longer life. I can't remember what bullshit Bible verse they took that from. But for me, it was kind of that point of like claiming my autonomy. And so once this is funny that she's not here and I'm still talking. But it was hard to break through that fear. And I think I forgot to mention that I had struggled a lot with OCD growing up. And so it was really hard for me to break rules because I was so afraid that like God was going to punish me because I'm going against authority, and that's seen as going against God, and God's going to punish you for that. You should feel convicted. So it's really hard to get past that indoctrination, that conditioning. So after my first semester and like experiencing that, I'm like, okay, in order to survive at Bob Jones, I have to break the rules. I have to have a break to be by myself. So eventually I learned to just get on shorts and a t-shirt, put dress clothes over that, and walk off campus like I'm going to church. And I went to a park, and I would do that every week. And I eventually did go to a liberal church where I was able to connect with a family who would help me.
Which is wild. That's still just, that idea is wild to me. Hey, Ryan, thanks for joining us. He said, I just showed up and it sounded like you were describing a scene from a horror movie a minute ago. Legitimately, it did. Like, it did. That's wild. And so you're like, basically, in order to find any reprieve, I have to pretend to go to church and then also find a family at a different church who's willing to basically harbor you like a fugitive.
And it's interesting because I was never looking for a family to take me in. I literally just wanted a safe community to belong. And I ended up meeting this very liberal family who's like, hey, we live across the street from Bob Jones University.
What's that got to be like, first of all?
Like the odds of that.
Yeah.
And meeting them and them being there.
You're almost like, it's like, what's the phrase they use to describe somebody who's like so deep on the inside they're hidden? That's what it's like living across the street from BJU. It's like you're so close to the eye of Sauron that you're like not suspected of being, one of the outliers.
That's true. Yeah. And so I was able to go to their house like a couple of times a week just to get away and just watch TV in their living room. And college is supposed to be a time where you're claiming your autonomy, finding out what you believe, exploring different things, exploring your sexuality, having new experiences. But you're not allowed to do any of that at Bob Jones. You're told what to think, what to believe. You can't do this, you can't do that. Like every aspect of your life is controlled. And it got to the point where I'm like, oh my God, I'm breaking so many rules. Like I'm skipping church. I'm listening to secular music. And I'm trying to remember the other ones I broke, but like, and it's ridiculous. Like I wasn't being bad at all. I was just being fucking human.
Yeah, you were being a college-age human being, and you were being a good one at that. Like you were being a really good kid. That's crazy.
Like, that's my entire life being the rule follower and then learning to. It's funny that like Bob Jones taught me or made me break rules just to survive. But
that's what I'm saying. Like, it's almost like you would never have broken any rules if they hadn't forced them so far down your throat that you literally had to in order to survive. That's wild.
Yeah,
It's almost
and
like the opposite of what they want.
mhm. Yes, exactly. And for me, it got really scary because then that freshman year, second semester, I realized that I was being watched. And like, you're always watched, but I realized I was being watched by a specific staff member and that I was being followed when I went off campus because there would be times during the week where I would go to this park that I would go to every Sunday because I'm like, I need a break. I need to go to the park. I would walk half a mile away to this park that was nearby. And one day I saw this dorm supervisor walking and I was like, oh, he's walking really far behind me. Oh, maybe he's just on a walk on the sidewalk like I'm in. I'm just going to this park. I kept walking. He kept being behind me. And so I ended up going down all these different roads, trying to see if he would go down them. He did. And so once I kept turning, once I got around a corner where I was out of sight, I ran like hell. And I ran back to campus because I did not want this person to find out where I was going because that was my only safe space.
And that is illegal in most states, if not all. That's wild.
And that really freaked me out. So I'm like, okay, let's be a little bit more careful about breaking the rules. And I was like, do they know I'm skipping church? And so it
Let's
ended
be a
up
little more careful about decompressing in a park. Like that's what they have you thinking, right? I'm just trying to highlight the insanity of the scenario, just in case anybody forgot. It's wild.
And then it got to the point where it was one night that I'm like, ugh, I need to go to the park again because I need to get out of my dorm. Like there was no safe space on campus. And so it was at night and I started doing this several nights, going to this park. And it was one night I went and I'm like, okay, I have to get back by a little bit before 10:30 because 10:30 is when discipleship group starts. I have to be back for that. And so I go off to the park. I walk it took me around like 30 minutes to walk to this park, sometimes 20 if I was like really fast walking. Honestly.
If you were being chased by a member of the faculty or staff of the university.
Yeah. And so I remember getting back before discipleship group and the RA on my floor, so the residence assistant, they'd be the one that would sweep the dorm every morning. We would also go to them about demerits, or they would just they would inspect our rooms during chapel. I forgot to mention that. They would inspect our rooms about every day. It was called room check. We had these basically had to keep the room completely clean. We would have to make our beds every day perfectly, and if it wasn't perfectly made, we would get demerits. So very like some kind of military style stuff integrated into that school. And yeah, so they would check our rooms every day and basically monitor us in addition to the discipleship group leaders and the assistant leaders with them. But I got back to my dorm for this park. I sit down. I feel a bit better at least. And my residence hall assistant knocks on my door like a minute later. And he comes in. He's like, hey, like, Andrew, I wanted to ask, like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah. And then, like, in that environment, you never say no.
No.
You always have to be happy. You always, because if you're not, and you're struggling mentally, that's a spiritual thing, and you're like forced into biblical counseling, and you're shamed and blamed. So you always have to keep this fake happy, like, oh yeah, I'm fine. And he's like, yeah. He's like, I'm kind of concerned. He's like, I saw you walking into the woods like earlier, and in my mind, I'm like, okay, the woods are the park. He saw me walking into a park, and I'm like, oh. And in my mind, I'm like, how do you know I was going to be there? Like, number one, like there were barely any street lights. It was so dark and it was half a mile away. And I'm like, I didn't see him like walking and following me. And, did he drive his car there and know that I was there and waited for me? Like when he saw me leave, did he drive there and wait? Like that was going through my mind as he's saying this. Cause that's like, just trying to figure out. And so he's like, yeah, I saw you there, and like, I don't know, just want to know if you're okay. I was like, yeah, I'm fine, and thank you for asking. He's like, oh, okay. And he left and closed the door and just chills just all over me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like he knows where I went. He knew I was going to go there. Someone's watching me. And I'm like, am I on some kind of like blacklist or some list of students that are watching at this school? And so from then on, and I'm like, how am I going to make it at this school? Like, and thankfully I made it through freshman year, survived, and you know, I was still struggling with going back sophomore year just because the mental health struggles, but I managed to go back, and I was in a completely new dorm, not around those people who harassed me my freshman year, didn't know anyone, and the thing was, my freshman year, I was on a freshman floor, and they do keep a lot more. They have extra watch, I think, over freshmen. So there was still a lot of control even sophomore year, but it wasn't to the extent that it was my freshman year. So yeah, my sophomore year was a bit better, and
And
I
it's wild to me that a bit better still means like no secular music, no
yeah,
going to
still
the
the same
park,
stuff.
no decompressing, no oversleeping on accident. You have to email them the night before. That's wild.
Yeah, and so it was interesting because I'm like, oh, I'm like, I wonder, I bet they've forgotten about me because freshman year's over. So I did still continue to go to the park. I don't remember. I've never noticed anyone after that following me from then on, at least that I knew of.
Yeah, that's
And
the important part is that you knew of. Yeah.
yeah, and so as I continue breaking rules, and for me, I was like, I had to find community on this campus. Like, I didn't have any friends. Like freshman year, like everyone found their groups and became besties, and I didn't have any friends. And because I was just so scared, and like when you can't be authentic and you can't be yourself, like you can't connect with people.
Right. Yeah.
And so sophomore year, I ended up changing majors. My first year at Bob Jones, I was a filmmaking major. Terrible major, but I was a
I'm
freshman.
just trying to picture what kind of films they're making at Bob Jones. PG, Veggie Tales. Is that the films they're making at Bob Jones?
Yeah, I mean they would push the limits of some of the stuff. They would have some suspense and thriller stuff they would make, which really surprised me. But the art teachers at Bob Jones, they were known to be more liberal and more lax.
Interesting.
It's just,
Huh.
yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. And so after that, I was like, okay, like I want to study more graphic design, photography stuff. And so that's basically what kind of I switched to my sophomore year, and I was in a new department, and the art department was like my new or my first safe space at Bob Jones
Wow.
University. A lot of like gay students everywhere.
What?
Like I could just count them in the halls. I'm like, I would just go to the art building. And I'm like, in my mind, like gay, 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 gay. Like, yes, love it. Live for it. And and I found a major that I loved, so that made it better at least. And sophomore year was when I met my best friend from Bob Jones, and we're still friends after
Oh,
all the shit
good.
that's happened. So we're still best friends
That's
afterwards.
good. That's so good.
And she's the one who's like stuck by my side through all of it, the only one really. And it's been interesting because I've made friends from Bob Jones after leaving that I knew of. They're like, oh, like awesome. Like it's nice to know who you really are, and like you're speaking out against this university and all that. But yeah, sophomore year, continue to break rules. I ended up getting into kind of like a romantic-ish thing with a guy on campus there, which is actually it ended up being like a narcissistic abusive relationship. So that was trauma. That was a
Yeah.
whole other thing I don't have
Well, it's like,
time
how are
to
you supposed to know how to navigate that when everyone around you is telling you that that experience in general is wrong and horrible and you shouldn't do it? Like, how are you supposed to have like a healthy relationship like that when
Mhm.
its entire existence is sinful and horrible?
Yeah, so this person that, in long story short, they were just thankfully, within around a month of being around this person, I was able to get away from them.
Good. That's
Um,
good.
and it was just interesting because looking back, I see how I was groomed to be in abusive relationships and toxic relationships because this macro religious system is a narcissistic, abusive, authoritarian system anyways, and it produces these relationships and marriages like
Hmm.
it literally produces narcissistic, abusive, authoritarian families. It's taught us the truth, and
Yeah.
then you're taught that's the way it is. Even with your relationship with Christ, it's like that. So it's like
Yeah.
it's a model, a toxic model for all these social relationships. And so
Yeah.
yeah, so that was scarring, and like not being able to get help with that at all.
Yeah. Brian's wondering if you felt comfortable making friends in the art department when you kind of figured that out about your peers.
I mean, I felt more comfortable, but I was still scared about revealing my sexuality to the people I thought that were gay because I didn't know if they were repressing it or not. But there was one friend that I basically told without saying it. I basically said it in like code, I guess you would say, in a classroom that I was gay.
Yeah.
And it was funny because there is this society that was known for having a lot of gay people. I did not join it because I did
That's
not want to be
interesting.
called out for it, and everyone hated that society. Like they talk shit about it all the time.
Because of that, or because outside
Oh,
of
thank
that, they
you.
were also just terrible?
Yeah, I mean, I think they had a reputation of just being really stuck up. They
Interesting.
did. Yeah.
The only way to do it. Yeah. That's I mean, although at the same time, I feel like if I were existing in like a band existence, I'd probably be a little stuck up too. I'd be like, bitch.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'm sorry, it's true. The gays do have a reputation for being really stuck up. Like, I'm not gonna lie. It's true. It's true. I'll testify to that.
I bet you know what though? I bet their beds were always made. I bet they passed inspection like every single day.
Yes, yes, I bet so. But and it was interesting because it was called Omega, and that was the society. And I remember talking with this friend, and like I could tell that they were not bougie or a Boge,
Mhm.
and I could tell they had that kind of rebel vibe, and I loved that, and I was living for that, and I was like, yes.
Awesome.
And just I could tell too, like this person majorly broke the dress code for the girls, and I was like, like I'm like, ooh, I'm like, that's like I need her, like, please. And so she would sit in front of me in art class, and I would be just talking my normal gay ass voice. And she was like, yeah, what society are you in? And I'm like, yeah, I'm in the Wolves. And I'm like, I should have been in Omega. And she was like, she's like, I know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. That's great. That
And
also
so,
just sounds like a wonderful friendship.
yeah. And so we became really good friends. And like, we're not as good friends now, which is fine. Like, I feel like when you
Yeah.
graduate college, it's just you part ways. And
Yeah, it's so easy to become like really super tight in college when the
Mhm.
real world has other plans.
Yeah. And so it was nice to have that. But like, the person who would become like the best friend I'm still really close with now, we met also through the art department, and we were both like major misfits. Like she was like an ethnic minority on that campus. Like the campus was full of so many white
I
people,
was
just
gonna say,
white
I just
people.
assumed it was only white people.
Yeah, it's mostly white, and like it is so interesting because there were a few African American students, not many. Um, so it was just, and it was so funny because Bob Jones was always trying to get pictures of them.
I'm sure they were here for the website, for the Instagram. Yeah. Wow.
Look at this black person walking on our campus. And Bob Jones has a past of major racism. I forgot to mention they banned interracial dating until 2000.
Really? Why am I surprised? Why am I still shocked? I don't know why I'm still shocked after you're telling me all this.
And do you want to know why they lifted that interracial dating ban?
Why?
Because
Gonna
of
piss me off.
George W. Bush. That's why.
So he came in and he was like, this shouldn't be happening like this. He was like, I don't know what's going on here, but
He was criticized for speaking on campus. And people were like, once he spoke on campus, it put Bob Jones under a national spotlight. And
Mm.
Bob Jones III went on Larry King to talk about Bob Jones's interracial dating ban.
So the school was like, guys, if everybody finds out what we're really like, they're gonna think we're racist. So I think we need to just drop the racist stuff. We're still racist, don't get me wrong, we're still racist, but outwardly we have to pretend that we're not. Is everybody on board with this? I'm gonna go on
Yeah.
TV and talk about how we're not racist anymore. Okay. That's
And
nuts.
it was just crazy because I thought about that. I'm like, what if George W. Bush never went there? Like,
Who knows?
How much longer would it still be like that
You,
today?
you know it's wild when George W. Bush makes the school change their racist policies. Like that's wild.
Mm,
That's
yeah, so
wild.
sorry. That's a little tidbit.
No, that's a
Um,
beautiful tidbit. That's gonna be living rent free in my head for a very long time.
and so yeah, so sophomore year I got more comfortable, and I met that other best friend, and we got really close, and it became really good. And for me, it was like the first close real friendship I had where I could actually start and begin to be authentic, where someone accepted me for every part of me. And we both had our own major traumas we were dealing with, which affected our relationship a lot. And and I was still in contact with that family that I had met, and that was nice because I could still go there every once in a while. And eventually, like, it was sophomore year, wasn't it? Oh my god, was it sophomore year? So wait, sorry, I'm trying to think of the timeline in my head.
Yeah.
2018 and oh my god, yeah, that was the start of the pandemic, my sophomore year, second semester. And it was so awful because I'm like, here I am. I met this family. I'm able to, to go over there once in a while. I've made a couple of really good friends at Bob Jones. My mental health is getting a little bit better because of that. Still an awful environment, but because I had those protectors that helped me. And, I remember in January of 2020 hearing about this pandemic that was starting in China. And I was like, oh, I'm like, that will never get here. Our government, they're smart. They're not that dumb to like, they'll take the precautions they need. Nope. Nope.
No.
Nope.
I mean, the good news is they never let men and women within 6 feet of each other anyway. They had the social distancing down, I feel like. Like, if you're not talking, you're not spreading COVID.
Yeah.
Right?
And so, sorry. And what I meant was that our government was not going to let COVID in the country, like in
Oh
January.
no, that didn't happen.
That did not happen. And so here I am. I'm like, okay. And then I'm at Bob Jones and I'm hearing about. And then when I hear that it's starting to spread in the US, and I'm like, oh, okay, like, yeah, we'll see. And so I'm kind of nervous about it. But then I'm like, I'm so isolated on this campus from everything and everyone. I'm like, okay, whatever. And then when things started closing, shutting down across the country, I think in March of 2020, that's when I'm like, holy fuck. And realizing that, something like this hasn't happened in like a century. Like the last time was like,
Right.
they don't the flu pandemic that happened, the Spanish flu. And so I was like, oh my god. And like I'm like, oh well, we're Bob Jones, we're not gonna shut down. We're not going to. But they ended up shutting down. I remember, when the country started shutting down, there was a chapel service where they're like, we have to shut down the school. We're finishing the semester online. And I was like, oh wow. And it was awesome because when I went back to my parents, even the church I grew up in, it closed. It
Interesting.
closed.
I'm
I was
really surprised
shocked.
Bob Jones closed because it just seems like the kind of place that would like not care about that.
Yeah, and I think it was because it was so new and what the like officials were saying. I think they just decided to do that, and so it was terrible too because the international students, believe it or not, international students come to Bob Jones University, and
I can't
so
even imagine what that must be like for them. Like, I think we talked about this before. Like, bro just wants to play soccer. Like, he just wants to play soccer. What's all this other stuff? What's all this business going on? That's crazy.
yeah, and so it closed, and then I'm still stuck in my parents' house, so that was really bad for my mental health in a pandemic, finishing school and.
Oh, so like they went virtual and you had to move back into your parents' house to finish school?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Was
Yes.
that was that worse than your first year on campus, or was that better, or just different in general? Like just a different bad
I mean,
experience?
it was just different bad experience, and it was annoying because I remember being like, "Oh, well, I'm doing it virtually. I don't have to tune into chapel. They won't know if I'm tuning in or not. They're not keeping track of that." And I remember my mom being like, "Oh, aren't they doing chapel live during this time?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm really busy with school. I need to do homework. And then she got her phone out, pulled it up, like turned it up as loud as possible, put her phone in front of me. Here, listen to this. And here I am, an adult college student, and I have to be forced to listen to this stupid sermon. And it's something that continued on when I stayed at home in the summers, because there was a summer where my mental health got really bad and I went into major depression, and I had struggled with depression throughout my teen years. And I told my dad, I'm like, I can't go to church anymore. I'm so depressed. It's making me so depressed. It's so terrible for my mental health. And so my dad would be like, okay, he's like, I won't make you go to church because I'm worried for your spirit, blah blah blah, or whatever, like, because I was so depressed. And he was like, but every church service you miss, you have to listen to a sermon.
I won't, but there's still like nothing's ever free. I feel
No,
like
and
it's always like
so
you have to make up for it somehow.
here I am, like a grown ass adult, and I'm like, oh, like it's so tired of being treated like a fucking child. And like in their minds, any missed opportunity to listen to a sermon or go to church, that is from Satan, because for some reason God doesn't speak to you all the weeks that you go to church. But if you miss that one time, that could be the time that God speaks to you and convicts you with the Holy Spirit, and this incredible thing could happen. So you have to, every chance like the church doors are open or there's a service, you have to hear it. And that was their thinking and their minds. And so that was really hard, being there from like April to August of that
And
year,
then
2020.
did they open campus back up later in 2020?
They did, and they had very, very strict. Well, I mean, I wouldn't say strict. Ugh. I mean, they had some strict protocols, but other ones were really stupid. Um, you know, here we are. I remember in the beginning of the semester, they're like, "All right, everyone," and of course, we didn't have much data in the beginning about masks and different things. Like, yes, there's proof that certain masks are better than others and that others help, but they're like, all right, everyone, let's get into the auditorium, 2,500 students, sit every other seat, have your mask on the entire time. And I'm like, if we're sitting in this fucking like tight container balloon or whatever, and we're all still breathing, and we're all like, we're not even 6 feet from each other. One seat is maybe like 2.5 feet. I don't know. And every other, and when we're forced to do this, I'm like, y'all are so fucking dumb. Like, we're in a global pandemic and we're sitting in.
And you think they would still stream it? You think they'd be like have the RAs check to make sure you're in your dorm, like streaming it or something? That's to go from it's so bad we have to shut down and send you home to being like everybody can come back in the auditorium at the same time.
Yeah, and so, and the thing is, like, you already have all the same strict rules, but here you are, in addition to that, stressing now about all these different protocols, which of course, like, we needed to keep safe, but God, it just made it so much more worse. Like that, and I know a lot of people, a lot of conspiracy theorists and bullshitters are like, oh, all this stupid control. And like for me, yes, it was more
Yeah.
annoying control. Okay,
Yeah.
like from a different perspective.
It's like a whole different type. It's like right when you think you're gonna get some reprieve at all, there's like a whole
Mhm.
new kind of control.
A new
Wow.
layer. Yeah. And so I
Yeah.
was like, and I understand like, oh, we need to be safe. And I'm like, oh, isolate. I'm like, I'm already kind of doing that anyways. So
That's already how I live my life. So it's like, what's lockdown? Oh, that happened? Sorry, I was just living my normal life alone by
yeah.
myself.
And
Wow.
so, yeah, and it was interesting because I was in a depressive episode, just things triggered from religious trauma with my parents, the pandemic, a lot of unprocessed things, a lot of internalized homophobia, just so much. And I got really suicidal my junior year. And long story short, I ended up meeting with like a biblical counselor. And basically, because I was so suicidal this day, I met with them and I told them about just my life, how I've been treated, that I was gay, and just all the hatefulness and stuff. Were you mad at God? Yeah, when I believed in that God, yes, during that
Yeah, I was
time.
gonna say,
Yeah.
as long as you believed, yeah.
When I believed in that. And this person, after hearing all these horrible things that I went through growing up in the IFB, he was like, oh, I see how I see how you've been paying for your sin. So, like, blaming me for everything, not holding
Yeah.
anyone accountable for the way they treated me or what they did to me or the messages I was
No,
exposed to.
you've just been paying what you owe.
And
Wow.
so here I am suicidal to this person, and like that was like the breaking point, the straw that like really broke for me. And at that point, I kind of revealed to him that, like, yeah, I don't really think I'm a Christian. Like, I don't care anymore. Like, I don't give a fuck. And I was shocked after revealing myself being gay and not being a Christian that I wasn't expelled. But because I was still submissive, and at least he thought I was obeying the rules, and I wasn't, like, because I had a very clean record at Bob Jones.
Yeah.
Even though I was breaking the rules, I knew how to get away with it. But this person who knew I was suicidal was like, well, I'm not supposed to meet with you if you're not a Christian. So we can't really meet anymore.
Like washing their hands of the situation. That's wild. And so were you like, was that a relief? Or was that
I
like,
mean,
oh great, one more person, wonderful?
it was so awful to be re-traumatized. I guess you would call it the second wound, I think is what some people might call it, is when you're invalidated for your trauma or blamed or shamed for it.
Yeah.
But it was also a relief because I think it was the first time for me, like, saying a lot of those things, like verbalizing it
Out
at
loud,
least
yeah.
out loud. So in that sense, that was nice. But
I
still, that
bet,
other
yeah.
part, that was still shitty. So it was kind of like a bit of a weight. And also, I think the fact that I told this person who had a very high authority, they were like, had a high position in student life, I'll say.
Yeah.
And the fact that I told them that I wasn't in trouble, that they just moved on, as long as I was, like, in their eyes, not getting in trouble. So I just kind of moved on with my life. And it was interesting because, like, during my second semester,
Wild.
junior year, I had like a reconversion moment, which I don't know if I talk about that too much. I mention it every once in a while. But here I am, like, when you're so, and looking, and thankfully I was able to get out of it. But what happened was, and I realized looking back, I was exposed to a narcissistic abuse cycle on, like, a religious system level. And in a narcissistic abusive relationship, you are abused, whether it's emotionally, physically, psychologically, whatever. You were abused, and then there were moments of, like, love and affection, I guess you would say, like those crumbs of it that keep you
Right.
hooked, where they make you feel so, yeah. It makes you think those abusive relationships are normal, and they're not. No. And so here I am at Bob Jones, constantly being shamed in the sermons, being spiritually abused, emotionally abused in these sermons, and by that biblical counselor. And I remember there was just this random sermon where the president of Bob Jones just talked about the love of God. Like, there was no catch, there was no "you're worthless." It was just love, 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 like ooey gooey, emotional, positive, all love. And it just caught me off guard because, like, I needed true love, someone to care about me, that true belonging. And that was something I was still struggling to know how to accept or cultivate because
Or
of my
even what it
trauma.
looks like. Like, who knows what that
Yes.
even looks like? Yeah.
Yes. And so I became so overcome and just, like, broke. It just broke me.
Yeah.
And I ended up getting saved. And it felt really good for a little bit. It was an emotional high. And I texted this biblical counselor, like, "Hey, I got saved today. Can we meet?" And yeah, since I got, in air quotes, like, saved, he's like, "Let's get back together." He was fine. And it was a week later after that first meeting of getting, like, in air quotes, saved, like, the high was just all gone. And I
Nothing has
realized
changed, really.
nothing changed. It was nothing different.
Yeah.
And it was emotional manipulation. I realized that.
Well, and
And
also, like, your desperation. You were, like,
Mhm.
desperate for that connection, and they knew that, and they removed that connection that you had with any other human beings until you were willing to follow the rules and, like, submit, basically.
Yes. And so when that happened and I realized, I'm like, oh, like, this is an emotional experience. I was manipulated. This is not real.
Yeah.
And that was nice because throughout most of my life, I got saved over and over again because I was so afraid that I was going to hell because you were supposed to happily conform to the system if you were saved. And
Yes.
there's a part of me that was so miserable in it. And
Yeah.
just from all the toxicity and harm. And so I continued meeting with this person knowing that I most likely wouldn't end up in this. I wouldn't end up being a Christian. But I'm like, you know what? This person, they literally had like a master's in divinity. Like they knew at least the Bob Jones theology. So I genuinely wanted to learn more about theology and about what he thought a Christian was. And it was interesting. And there were some good points, but I could definitely, there's a lot of cherry picking
Yeah.
involved
Oh,
in
yeah.
these sessions
There
that I
has to
really,
be.
so much that I totally saw it as it was happening. And I'm like, he's just cherry picking all these different things in the Bible to construct what he wants the Bible to be and what he wants his belief system to be.
Yeah.
And like taking all these different pieces and trying to like put them together into what he wants, the image
Yeah.
that he wants. And so I saw that, but I still learned a lot. And it was the sad thing was he wanted it to eventually turn into conversion therapy.
No.
And so and I realized later afterwards that I was being like, I guess you would say like spiritually groomed or psychologically groomed to accept that. He was building that relationship with me through we called it discipleship. That's what we did in the beginning, discipleship. And then like I remember he gave me this book about this gay person who had renounced their sexuality and God changed them, and they were married to a woman and had kids. And so he gave me this book. This is my first semester junior year, fall of 2020. And, you know, I had it for a little bit and he's like, yeah, he's like, we'll look at this. He's like, you don't have to read this semester, but like next semester we want to go over this. We'll eventually get to that point where, you know, we'll work on your sexuality and different things and changing that. And
that's like an assignment. Like, yeah, we'll read chapter 1 of like Romeo and Juliet, and then we'll work on your sexuality. We'll try to train that out of you.
And I was uncomfortable with that, but I took the book because I was still dealing with so much internalized homophobia and religious trauma at that point. And I think there was, I don't know, that unrealistic idea that this person could do that or that maybe they had the answer. But there was still those doubts in my mind. So what happened was that semester I ended up getting COVID. That was the first time I had ever gotten it.
I was about to ask you if you ever ended up getting it.
And so it was actually really awesome because I ended up having the worst symptoms when I was around everyone. So when I started getting symptoms, I thought it was like allergies or like a cold. And, you know, I wore my mask and all these things. And, oh, yeah, we would have to take like this test every day of like symptoms or whatever. And if we didn't pass it, then we had to tell someone. And, you know, I just lied on this test that I would take on my phone. And you would have to show it when you went to the classroom that you're okay. And I wasn't okay. I was just trying to push through it. And it got worse. And it got to the point where I got dizzy. And it was when I like started brushing my teeth. And, you know, it was strong mint. I couldn't taste any, like nothing. It was just feelings in my mouth. Like feeling it in my mouth. And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, I have COVID. And so like I texted my RA. I'm like, hey, I have COVID. And they didn't have tests at this point on campus for us to take. We had to like be driven to a hospital and like run through this line where they were giving tests to people or giving them tests. And so I had to be like driven in this ratchet minivan that the school had to the hospital. And I was positive, but before I did that, I had to go to like their quarantine dorm and meet with some of the health officials or health staff at the school. And I was meeting with, it was the wife of the vice president of the school. She was in the health area. And I remember sitting down, she was far across the room. She's like, so when did you start having symptoms? How many days ago was it? I was like, 5 days ago.
What'd she say?
And she was like, how did you get into class? And I just sat there silent.
You're like, well, the RAs kept checking to make sure I was there. So I went like you told me I had to. Like, I don't understand what you want. That because you know that if you'd emailed in and been like, I have COVID, I'm not feeling good, they would have been like, well, we need a positive test before you can miss anything. So it's like a lose-lose.
Yes, exactly. And so at that point, she was so pissed off and mad at me, which I totally understand. It was a selfish thing of me to do to not get tested and to be around people.
It
But
was a selfish thing for you to do to not like report yet another thing that's, like it's like, oh, what can you do that's correct there? I've yet to hear one thing you were able to do correctly.
yeah, that's true. But yeah, so at that point, I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, I don't have to do any required activities. I don't have to have chapel. I don't have discipleship group. I don't have to go to church. I'm in this quarantine dorm. And at that time, you were quarantined for 2 weeks. And so I'm like, I'm going to be quarantined for 2 weeks in this dorm where I don't have to do these things. And I don't even have to do homework because they were actually very lenient about that in the beginning. They were like, teachers can be they're like, oh, they were like, the teachers have to be flexible about homework because people experience COVID at different levels. It wasn't
Yeah.
the same for everyone. So
Yeah.
it was such a new thing. So they're like, teachers are very lax about that. So for me, I was like, you know what? Let's get ahead. So this is how I am. I'm like, let's get ahead on a lot of these things. And this is my vacation in this quarantine dorm.
It was like a
Bob.
blessing in disguise.
It was, and, like, I didn't have anyone checking on me. It was only them to deliver my food, and that was it, and to make sure I was still alive inside the dorm.
Wow. And did they want you to like stream into chapel or were you allowed to just wow?
No, they did not.
Was
I
it the
think
best 2 weeks of your life?
they were like at Bob Jones, at least. I wouldn't say
Yeah.
life, but
Yeah.
at Bob Jones, it was nice, and I remember when I got out of quarantine and I went back to my job where I was basically a photo assistant in the photography department, and there would be another worker at the desk sitting there. They would help check in camera equipment, and I had never really talked to this person much, and it was at this point where, oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, I I read that book during quarantine out of curiosity. I read it in like a day. It was a longish book, but like I'm a fast reader, so like I got through it in a day. I had plenty of time, and like, oh, it was I don't remember that much from it. From what I remembered though, this gay person who claimed to be saved from homosexuality, at the very end, he was like, yeah, I'm married, I have kids, I'm happy, but he's like, I still have homosexual desires and I still have to fight them. And I'm like, you're not changed.
They
This
would
is
probably
not.
say like once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, but you can still make changes. It's like that's not
You're
a
right.
change.
They see it as an addiction or as a disease. But yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. You're right on that. And so I read it, and I didn't tell the guy I read it yet. And and if I remember it correctly, he actually gave it to me to read in quarantine. Like before I went in, he was like, "Here's this light reading for you."
Jeez. Yeah. That's wild. And so eventually, was it around that time? Was it long after that you ended up like having to part ways? Like what was the
Yeah.
timeline there? Was it
So yeah, the process of that was my mask began to fall, or I let it fall as I continued to be at Bob Jones University, and it was a story I was getting to with this worker that, of course, they didn't see me for 2 weeks, and they were like, "Hey, like, where were you?" And I was like, "Oh, I was sick with COVID." And they were like, "Oh, did you miss church?" And I was like, in my mind, I'm thinking, "Duh, I was in quarantine. I didn't,
yeah.
I was like, I couldn't go to church." She's like, "Oh, no, no, no." She's like, "I meant emotionally. Did you miss going there?" And I was like,
Yes.
and this
So
for a
much.
moment, I was like, do I be a fake bitch and conform, or do I be honest? And I was like, let's be fucking honest, because I'm so tired of this shit. And I was like, no, I did not miss it at all. I was so happy to miss church.
She's like,
And I didn't even tell her that I wasn't really even going to church anyways, because I knew she was a strict, like,
her
conservative
head would have
Fundie.
exploded. You're like, miss
Yeah.
it. I haven't been going. Like, what's there to miss? Her head just explodes, just like Alien, where it's like Satan just busts out of your
And
chest.
she just like gasped. She's like, "Oh my gosh." She's like, "You're scaring me." She's like, "Are you saved?" They're like, "LOL, did you miss church emotionally?"
Did you miss it the same way you miss your grandparents? Did you miss it the way that you miss a love on a hot summer rain?
And she just gets so worried. She's like, "Are you saved?" And I'm like, me knowing how many times I got like said their stupid ass prayer and believed it, and me literally like breaking down. I'm like, whatever. And so I was like, you know what? I'm like, I don't know. I'm not. And she was like, oh my gosh. She's like, I'm so scared for you.
So you came out of quarantine like swinging.
Yeah,
Swinging. You were
I
like,
did. I did.
yeah.
And this basically, I got into an argument with this person. They tried to convert me and tried to be like, in air quotes, loving. And then once I like refused and I rejected the gospel openly to them, they just went to the evil mode, honestly, just totally crazy. And this person's like, you know what, Andrew, you're gonna burn in hell for eternity. So
Isn't
just
that wild how that switch flips?
it is
Isn't
crazy.
that
It was
wild?
so crazy to me when I saw it happen. And like she went to this concerned suite to this condescending, evil, awful piece of shit person. And she was like, you're gonna burn in hell for eternity. She's like, if you break any of God's commandments, you've broken all of them. So Andrew, she's like, do what you want. Go out, rape people, murder, do every worst thing because you're gonna burn for eternity anyway. So have fun and do all of it. And she's like, you know what, Andrew? She's like, you're gonna be left behind when Jesus comes back. And
You're going to be left behind like the movies.
oh,
You're going to be left behind like Kirk Cameron.
honestly, I'd be left behind with him.
You're like, honestly,
I'm just kidding.
Don't threaten me with a good time.
It's time to explore your sexuality, Kirk. Like it's about time.
That's hilarious. Yeah, and so you were just like done at that point. You're just like, I'm gonna be me. Like,
yeah, and so this person then told me apparently there's like some verse in the Bible where Christians will come back to judge those that are left behind and torture them, I think. And she told me that she was going to be coming back and finding me and to torture me and to judge me.
I don't even know what to say to that. Like, that's like a threat. Like that. Do you have a restraining order against this person?
No,
Because do they understand that that's unhinged? Like, can you imagine thinking that you're so loving and so caring and so like devout that you're gonna like threaten to come and torture someone after you got raptured and they didn't?
And yeah, like in that moment, I was like horrified. And I
Yeah.
was
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh my God, because this person seemed really nice on the surface.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a
Were
lot
you
of them do.
Have you been this way the whole time? Like, are you the person that was following me to the park? Like, what's going on? This is so scary.
And so at this point, I'm like, oh, fuck. I'm like, I should have never said any of this. And so then I just tried to just make her experience cognitive dissonance. So I was like, do you believe, okay. I'm like, when she said about murder, I'm like, oh, okay, you believe murder is wrong. And, you know, you believe abortion is wrong also. I'm like, how do you feel about, you know, God killing all those babies in Egypt?
That doesn't count. They were already born. It's only abortion if they're not born yet. That's yeah.
And so she was like, she's like, you know what? You know, they had a chance to be protected. And I'm like, and I told her, I'm like, that wasn't her. That was not the child's choice. That was like the parents over them. They had to put the blood on the door or whatever, the lamb's blood, like all over the door to stop this angel of death from killing. I'm like, that wasn't their choice. They didn't choose that. And then God killed them. And just the way she would try to justify it, it's just the cognitive dissonance. Oh my God. Like once she just started digging, like once that happened, I just threw that in there and I was no.
After that, you're like, oh, I recognize that this is not somebody that you can exchange with. This is just going to keep going south.
Yeah. And so anyways, believe it or not, I actually gave her my number because she's like, I want to text you and I'll be praying for you. And she would text me every once in a while that I'm praying
I'm gonna
for
come
you.
back and torture you. You're like, here's my number.
I know this just shows my lack of boundaries at that time, and still that people pleasing coming through.
That's how messed up that is. It's
I
so ingrained.
literally couldn't say this person who just threatened me to torture me. Oh yeah, here's my number.
Yeah. Oh my God, I'm so sorry to inconvenience you. Here's my number.
And so eventually I did block her because I was like, Sydney's face is killing me. The surprise is intense.
I'm just like, that's wild.
And so after that, though, that person changed shifts because they did not want to see me again after that.
You know what? More power to him. I think
Yeah.
I can think you'll be all right with that loss.
Yeah, I was so happy when they changed shifts. Like, I don't have to see that bitch anymore. And so, like, at that point, I was like, okay, Andrew, like, you need to, like, that was a slip. We can't do that anymore. Like, that went
Hot
that was terrible. So, junior year, second semester, spring semester of 2021, that was when, I was meeting with the biblical counselor a lot more. And it eventually, at the end, turned into conversion therapy. And when it did, like, it was only like I remember one official, it was like, I only went to one session of like conversion therapy, and it was like towards the end of it. And like, I don't remember anything that happened. Like, I just majorly, I think, disassociated. And
yeah, I have no doubt.
I remember leaving I remember like walking the room, and I remember leaving, and like, that's it. I don't remember what happened. And when I did leave the room, I just felt those feelings and thoughts of like feeling suicidal. I felt that depression. I felt this weight in my chest, this anxiety of like, oh my gosh, I'm unacceptable. I have to get rid of this like immediately, or like I can't live with myself. And once I started,
it makes you worse. Like, it's supposed to be
it
therapy,
does.
and it makes it worse.
It does. And so at that point, I had started to gain enough autonomy and like boundaries to then text him later that week and be like, I'm done. Like, I'm not doing this. This is toxic.
Good.
This is harmful. And he texted, he's like, let's meet and talk about this. And I'm like, no, like, there's no talking about this. I've made my decision.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm like, if you want to do that to other people, whatever, but don't do that to me. Like, it's so, I don't know. I can't remember if I said abusive, but I just said, this is harmful. Like, this is toxic. And so that was the last of that. And that was towards the end of my junior year. So here I am, end of junior year, out, done meeting this person, got a nice overview of a semester of what it's like to be a Bob Jones person or Christian. And I'm like, you know what? Fuck Christianity completely. Like, I don't want to fix it. I don't want to make it work. I'm like, if it's the truth, I shouldn't have to adjust it. I shouldn't have to make it work. So why should I? And I'm like, it's not making my life better. It's making it worse. So I just, and like, it was so fucking shitty to deconvert from Christianity. Because I didn't realize like the emotional power it had over me. Like, it was like experiencing withdrawals from a drug.
Yeah.
That's what it was like. That's what it felt like. My brain was so fucked. And I just remember like, oh my God, just exposing to myself to all the information I could that like refuted the fundamentalist worldview, completely tearing apart this dogma that the Bible is perfect. That was pretty easy to tear apart. So once I tore apart like creationism, inerrancy of scripture, and started like researching mythology and like seeing how Noah's Ark was repeated from another story, and even how like there's like seeing different versions of the creation story also, I was like, oh, like, and still emotionally it was hard to deal with. But long story short, I ended up at Bob Jones. I know we're getting towards the end of our time. We're going pretty long.
You're good. Yeah.
But I ended up at Bob Jones. Sorry, what were you saying?
No, I was just gonna ask you to continue. Yeah.
Got you. So here I am, senior year. It's the fall of 2021, and in my mind, I have completely deconverted. There's no war inside of me going back and forth anymore between that indoctrination towards the other part of me, and it just felt weird. And like those feeling disillusioned, I guess, on Bob Jones campus, and then being like thinking, what the fuck am I doing here? Like,
Yeah.
why am I here? Like, I shouldn't be here anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, it's been so long. Then that kind of like sunk cost fallacy goes through your mind, like, oh, I've been here so
That's the
long.
worst. That's the in any
Just
aspect
stay.
of life. That's in any aspect of life where you're like, well, I've spent this much time and money and whatever resources, yada yada yada. Always toxic, always. And so, was it this mindset and this attitude that made you do that photography project that got
Yeah,
you?
and so when I went to the semester, and in my mind, I'm like, I've spent the last 3 years perfecting my photography, being an artist. I'm like, I want to make the most personal piece of work I've ever made, and I want it to help me. I know I want it to be authentic to me and express exactly what I want to express, because a lot of Bob Jones art students are usually like biblically based and have some kind of biblical message that brings you back to their dogma or their doctrine, and it's so cringy. And I wasn't going to do that. And in the major that I was in, my capstone class was a photography internship, and I was doing it at the school, and I had extra hours to just perfect my photography, and I didn't have to work on a final project technically in that class, but I decided to do that because I'm like, I'm a senior. Everyone's working on a final project. I want to have a final project my senior year that I can say, look at what I did after all these years of accumulating these skills.
It's interesting they give you an option. I've never heard of a school that gives you an option not to do one.
And the reason it was the major was so new, they technically didn't have a capstone class. There was no
Got
capstone
it.
class.
Got
And
it.
so my capstone was just like, in my mind, was the photography internship that I was doing. This was like the final thing. And so I was like, you know what? I have these extra hours to do photography. I'm going to spend the semester creating an art photo series. And so fine art photography, that was my genre, using photography as an art form. And so I spent that semester just countless hours making this photo series that I knew that I was going to publish. No, I decided I was going to publish in early 2022, and I was going to use it to tell my story of surviving religious trauma in that environment in the IFB and even at Bob Jones. And it was so healing because it's just, there are some things you just can't put into words, and I think that's the hardest part when I tell my story. Is like, and even as I'm writing my own book, I'm like, I don't know if I can put into words how awful all of this was.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this art, I think, can get really close to it, at
Yeah.
least. And it was this story of this person trapped in this environment where they're suffering, and all they have is religion, and they're locked in this room, and the person doesn't know it, but they have a key that's around their neck the entire time, and it represents autonomy and freedom. And this person is suffering throughout this entire series through different scenarios. They're praying and nothing's working. They're reading the Bible. They're being attacked by demons. They're having nightmares of burning in hell. All these different things. And in the end, the person finds information outside their religion, and they discover that they had the key, or really autonomy, to like make the choice to eventually leave. And so then in the end, the person, they put the key in the keyhole, and that's like the end of the series. As you see this person locked in the room, and in the end, they're unlocking it, and like they become their own hero, and they leave that all behind. And it was just so representative to like the how I was trapped my whole life, walled in into this environment, forced to live on this basically like commune style college campus,
Yeah.
basically. And in this series, and I announced that I'm be converted from this. I'm no longer a part of this, and I'm now gonna like, this was just like the start of me like really starting to dig into it. And it was interesting because to get to the point to make that, I had already been working on my memoir, and it was something that I started just to heal. I never thought I would eventually. I will publish it, not sure when, but it was something that I started writing about because I couldn't talk to anyone about my experiences, not even my parents, no one about Jones, and I'm like, I'm going to start writing. And so,
Yeah.
now the book is like 60,000 words. now.
Good. Well, and writing is so good because one of the things that humans are so good at doing is gaslighting ourselves and saying we didn't feel the way that we felt at that time, or like, oh, I was probably overreacting, or I wasn't that mad. Anytime I feel like a very strong emotion, I always write about it in the moment because
Same.
later on, when that person or that
My
organization
journal.
or my brain tries to be like, no, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. We can still hang out with them. We can still talk to them. We can still date them, whatever. You go back and you read in the moment, this is how you felt. This is the time, the date, and this is how you felt. And like
Mhm.
we are our best gaslighters. We're the first people to be like, you're being sensitive, like you're being a little extreme,
Yeah.
So
And I feel like a part of that too is like our indoctrination. Like a lot of people I think told us that. And it like and that's what I've really noticed is a lot of these voices or things in my head. Like I hated how people would tell me you are your own worst enemy. Because I feel like it pitted me against myself.
it's
But
all on you. You like that's their whole thing is blaming you for as much of your own action as they possibly can.
and so eventually I learned that like a lot of these voices are messages I heard from my pastor, from religion, from my parents, all these different things. And learning to heal and like deconstruct those messages is the part of my healing. And long story short, when I shared my photo series with the world by doing an interview with Josh Harris, who wrote I Kissed Dating Goodbye. He did a live show on his Instagram. I asked if I could be a guest and he agreed, and he interviewed me. And it's honestly it's still like my favorite interview because it was so raw and it was so emotional. It was like the first time doing it and I prepared so much, and I was shocked that I was able to like not cry during it
Yeah,
and get through it.
I would have. I don't know how you didn't. I would have for sure.
And it's interesting because there are sometimes like when I get interviewed and they'll say afterwards like, oh, you seem totally fine now. And it's real. I hate it when that happens. It's kind of really rude, but in my
Yeah.
mind I'm like, you have no idea how much I'm disassociating
Well, and also
when I
because of
say
all the
this.
work I've done on myself. Like,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes. Yes. And so it's like it's annoying because people are like, oh, it doesn't seem like it's a big deal. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, like I wish I could have brought you through that with me to show you how
Yeah.
awful. And so so I did that interview and I ended up getting expelled my senior year, my very last semester at Bob Jones University. And I remember it was like 2 weeks into the semester, my dorm supervisor, who didn't even know who I was, he came into my room. He's like, "Are you Andrew Pledger?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Come to my office downstairs in 5 minutes." And I was like, "Okay." And at this point, the family that I connected with in Greenville, they had seen the interview, and they're like, "If you get kicked out, you can live with us."
Wow.
And so I was like, "Oh, I'm like, that's so sweet." I'm like, "We'll see what happens." And so when I'm walking down to this meeting, like I stop for a second in the hall, and I call them. And I'm like, "I'm going to a meeting. I'm most likely going to be kicked out." And it was awful because I met with my dorm soup, and there were 2 other staff members that were going to be in there. One of them was this guy that I didn't have much interaction with. I knew about him, and the
I love
other
how
guy,
tall people don't even know you.
yeah. Oh, wait for it. And the other guy was my biblical counselor. Do you know how awkward and awful that was in that room with him again? I was like, I was so obvious with my body language. I was just like my arms crossed, turned away from him. Just like,
And your counselor's like, see, he's incorrigible. You just can't do nothing with him.
and it was just awkward hellos and like they try to make small talk and I was like, don't do that shit. And I'm like, no.
Yeah. And you
And I'm like,
automatically know he's told everybody everything you ever said in counseling.
oh yeah, there's no like privacy there at all. So he's like, do you know why you're here? And I'm like, Josh Harris interview. He's like, yeah. He's like, do you want to talk about anything you said in the interview? And I was just really confused. And I was like, is there anything you want me to address? Because like in the interview, like I came out of the closet, I talked about religious trauma, I denounced fundamentalist Christianity. Like those are the 3 main things that I did.
You're like, I've got a list. I'm happy to start unless you had some highlights you wanted me to focus on.
And like, I was thinking this in my mind, and what I said was, I was like, "Is there anything you want me to cover?" Because I'm like, I stand by everything I said, and I will never take any of it back,
Wow.
and I don't care.
They're like, "Is there anything you want to talk about?" And you're like, "Actually."
And so they're like, "Yeah," they're like, "We can't have you at this school anymore because you're not a believer, and
Oh.
you don't believe our doctrines. We'll hope you'll come back to Christ one day and be saved, and we'll pray for you."
I think we may have talked about this before in the past, but it's just weird how there's all this what's the word I'm looking for? There's all this talk about like helping, leading. And then the moment it comes to their chance to help and to lead and to guide, they don't want it. It's like, no, you're like, what we want is we want you to do half the work for us, and then we'll take you the rest of the way. We don't want to try and help you and lead you.
And that's the thing. You have to be a specific kind of person and believe exactly the same things as they do. And it was interesting.
Which, don't get me wrong, I'm glad they didn't. I'm glad you're like out there. I'm glad they didn't try, but that's just interesting that's the whole narrative, the entire narrative from top to bottom. And when it comes to actually putting it into action, they just dismiss you.
Yeah, and so I was surprised they never brought up my sexuality, because they had kicked out students in the past for being openly gay or queer.
They're like, "We have a lot of issues with what you said." And you're like, "Yeah." And they're like, "You said you denounced." And you're like, "Oh, wait, I'm not here because I'm gay?" Like, sorry, I thought this whole thing was about me being gay. Wait, this is about something else? Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and so because of legal issues in the past, they try to be very careful about how they kick out queer students. And so, and it was interesting because when you're kicked out, I don't know if it's all the time, but like, and I should have realized it then. I wonder what would have happened if I refused to leave, like, because they asked me to sign a form to withdraw. And so at that point, I'm like, oh, that's just how they kick people out. But then I'm like, and after I did it, I was like, I signed it, and I was like, because I was so excited to leave, like, you have no idea.
You're just like signing autographs like for everyone on your way
Yes,
out.
like, please. And it was weird because then I had to like write down my social security number on the paper that I'm giving to my dorm soup, and I'm like, before I signed it, I'm like, it's asking for my social security. I'm like, I'm nervous about this. I don't feel like this is safe on this piece of paper.
Yeah. Where's that even going?
And they said, like, we have to have it for the financial office. So I was like, whatever, here it is.
Can they just call me and talk to me about it? Do I have to give it to this other person who works in the dorm? Like,
yeah, it was really strange. I still gave it to him, and it's still fine, I guess.
Check your credit just in case.
And so it was interesting because there was a snowstorm there. So they were like, Andrew, they're like, we won't throw you out in the snow. But they were like, do you have a place to stay? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I moved, and they knew about that family because they watched the interview like beginning to end.
And they also watch you. Like,
yes,
they knew about them
they do watch me.
You.
Yes, and they were like, and it was funny because usually Bob Jones University, when they kick a student out, I've heard this happen. This happens a lot. They call the parents first, and the parents come up, and their child, or a really adult child, doesn't know that they're kicked out yet, and their parents show up to pick them up to leave.
Really?
Now that has happened a lot.
No, why didn't they do that with you?
Because in the interview, I talked about how my parents weren't thrilled about me going to Bob Jones University and how strict they were, KJP only, IFB, how fundamentalist they were. I think they were scared of talking to my parents, and really maybe scared of the situation they would put me in if that happened and if they were there. So they were like, Andrew, we're going to let you call your parents.
And instead, they just watch you walk across the street and just wave at them from your friend's house. It's like, no, I'm good. Thanks.
And so I did end up calling my parents, and I was like, sit down for this. I'm like, I got kicked out of Bob Jones. I did an interview with Josh Harris. I talked about religious trauma and all that I've been through, stuff that y'all have no idea about.
Look, I got a lot. Look, I'm just going to send you the episode and you can just listen to it and figure it out.
I did. I did do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did because I feel like I
The
didn't.
conversation's going to take as long as the episode, so just listen to this.
And so, my mom never listened to it, and my dad listened to a part of it, and when I called him about it, he's like, I only made it like 10 minutes in. He's like, I just started crying, and I couldn't watch it, and that was really stood out to me because my dad was never emotional. I'd maybe seen him cry maybe twice in my life. So to hear that, I was like, oh, you cried. You didn't even like finish it.
Yeah.
So I think he has more of an idea a little bit of what I experienced and what I've been through than my mom's just trying to live in a fantasy world where she's the victim
Yeah.
in the situation. And she's the one that needs the apology.
Yeah. And all of this happened very recently. Like I want people who are listening to understand how recently this
So
happened.
this happened in January of 2022, so like nearly a year and a half ago.
Yeah. Like in Tennessee, at least, time flies. Like it has been 10 seconds since then. And since then, you've started the first podcast, Speaking Up with Andrew Pledger. You started your second podcast, and it's called Surviving Bob Jones University, a Christian Cult. And you've become an activist, and you've got a website, and you've got like, I literally was inspired to sign up for Calendly for scheduling because of you. Like you've got so much of it together. Yeah, and yeah, Secular Rarity says no freaking way. Yeah, this happened like yesterday, right? And you've done so much in that amount of time, and you've done so much with your voice and your platform and the opportunities that you've been given. And I think it's only fitting for your whole brand that everything fell apart because of a podcast interview. Like to me, that's like so on brand for who you are as a person now. But I mean, where do you go from here? What are you doing with your life now?
So it was interesting because when I was expelled, I'm fired from all my jobs that I had on campus. I moved in with that family, and it was like, oh my gosh, I have no network. I'm like restarting my life. So there was a mix of fear, but also a mix of excitement and like, oh, I get to choose the life I get to have. And so for me, when I got out of that, number one, I found a really great therapist who actually went to Bob Jones, and they left it because it was so toxic. So they knew that environment. So I found that therapist, and they're still my therapist now. And it's a year and a half of therapy, a lot. I wonder if I could find any of Andrew's links. I'm sure. Yeah, you'll put them in there in a sec.
Though they're in there. Yeah, he
They're
says, "Oh yeah, I sure can. Go check them out, y'all." Yeah, they're all.
Oh,
down
okay.
there.
Oh, got you. Okay.
Yeah, he's directing everybody.
Oh, gosh, you. Yeah, and so I just, so I'm like, I'm in therapy, and that semester I took off of school. I'm like, I'm just going to start reading, and I'm just going to start going on different podcasts, telling my story. And eventually, as it got closer to the summer, I'm like, I need to get a job, and I need to start thinking about that. And I got contacted by Rachel Bernstein, and I had been on her podcast, Indoctrination. And she's a cult expert. She's been a cult expert for over 30 years. Has done such an incredible work. She's helped people out of like over 300 cults. Like, it's incredible. And
like, who would even know there were that many?
Oh my God! Like, there's like nearly 10,000 in the U.S.
Yeah.
And I honestly think there's more than that. But her team reached out, and they were like, "We love what you're doing on social media. We need a social media manager for our podcast. Would you be interested?" And I was like, yes. Yes.
Yes.
So much. It was so exciting how that worked out. And so it was great because it was so flexible, and I'm planning on continuing to do more freelance work because of that flexibility. But so that started in April of 2022, and I'm still working for the Indoctrination podcast. And in that time, I finished college. I transferred to Southern New Hampshire.
Yes, that's my favorite part of the whole story.
Finished. Screw you, Bob Jones. I did it, and
yeah.
I got my bachelor's. I ended up focusing on psychology in my senior year.
Yeah.
Because I want to become a therapist eventually. And I'm considering if I want to become a cult expert down the road or not. That's something that's like in my mind somewhere.
Or
I
maybe
can
like further on down the road when you're not quite as close to it, when you're
yes.
not like when your feet aren't still hot from standing in the
Yes.
fire. Yeah.
I know. Yeah, so and I do plan to get a master's in clinical mental health, but I am taking a break from school because I need that time to heal
Yes.
more. I
Yes.
think in that break. So yeah, I just finished my official graduation day was May 20th, 2023. So
Yeah,
5 days
it was
ago.
literally like 5 days ago. Yay! That's amazing.
So
That's like
I f-
everybody's
yeah.
saying congrats in the comments. Everybody's really happy for
Oh,
you.
that's so sweet.
Yeah, so that's amazing. And what I think is so interesting is at the very beginning of this interview, you were like, I worry that my critical thinking skills have been harmed in some way. And
Yeah.
here you're like, I'm taking time off school to focus on myself. I got my degree. I'm looking at all these projects I was reached out to for this ideal job, yada, yada,
Yeah.
yada. Like everything is going great because you set it up that way and because you prepared yourself and you got in tune with yourself and you're in counseling and you're focused so much on like your mental, physical, emotional health, and yet there's that little voice in the back of your head that's like, but maybe I'm not a very good critical thinker. And like, to me, it's like you've accomplished so much in such
Uh,
a short amount of time, and it's like heavy stuff. Like when I was right out of college, I was not doing anything that you're doing right now, and you've got so much of it together, at least from the outside. I know that on the
thank
inside I'm
you.
sure it's different, but yeah, you're crushing it. You're doing more at your age. I'm like, let's see, how old are you? You're 22, 23?
23.
23. Yeah, I'm turning 33 this year, and I learned how to use Calendly because of you. So you got your stuff together, like is what I'm saying. So I can't even fathom where you'll be at 33. I imagine there'll be a couple of books in the works or published or something,
I
but
think I'm hoping by 33, my memoir should be out, which I'm so excited for. But
yes, and I will buy a copy and I'll have you sign it and I'll send it to
uh,
everybody. Like, I don't know, follow me on Patreon and I'll send you a copy of his book. And then the money from his book will also go to him. I won't keep the
oh,
Patreon
that's
money for
sweet.
his book. That doesn't make any sense. But yeah, we're all so proud of you. Everybody in
Thank
the chat
you.
is so happy for you and so proud of you. Even the people who were arguing earlier, they're all agreeing that they're congratulating you and they're happy for
Oh,
you.
that's so sweet.
Yeah. What advice do you have for anybody who might be facing something similar to what you faced or might be too
Ooh.
afraid to admit they're facing it?
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked this question a lot, and to me, in order to be able to take care of yourself and do what you need to be able to even recognize that in yourself, and to even recognize that in yourself, you need to be in tune with your thoughts, your emotions, and your body. And that's so hard when you're in an environment where that's so demonized, where you're supposed to push that away. So I think for me, like I'm still learning to get in touch with my body and recognize that and be in touch with my emotions. But for me, um, just taking periods, like I guess the most healing thing for me that I can regularly do, I do a walking meditation just about every single day. It's usually around like
Without
10.
anybody following you?
Yes, without anyone following me. And it helps me get in tune with my body because I feel like I'm like my mind is just floating a lot of the time, disconnected from my body. So learning to notice like all the different sensations in your body. And my therapist, he's taught me different grounding techniques to help me do that. So just learning just to listen to your body,
Yeah.
like, oh, something doesn't feel right. I have a gut feeling. Just even like your body telling you need to use the restroom. Like I've always been so bad about not listening to my body. And when it comes to that, I'm like, oh, I need to get this done and to work on this. So learning to just stop. I have the right to take care of myself and take a break. So I think starting with that and getting in touch with your emotions and your body and learning to be open to different perspectives. And I think also being okay with not having to land anywhere and then
Yeah.
having to defend that worldview. It's
Yeah.
okay to just not have a label to yourself. And some people have told me, like, oh, are you an atheist? Are you this? Are you that? And I don't usually say anything because, like, I don't want that label.
Yeah.
I feel like there's so much exploring. And like, my brain isn't even fully developed yet. So,
You're like,
like,
listen, my brain is still developing, so relax.
So I'm doing a lot of different exploring. Um, I've been kind of in a period of just exploring different interpretations of the Bible. I'm about to dig into that. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. We'll see how triggered I get.
Yeah.
But I have this book. Someone introduced me to Bart D. Ehrman, and he's most famous for the book called Misquoting Jesus. I don't know his background, but um, he wrote a book which I'm excited to read about heaven and hell and like a history of the afterlife. And I've heard from other people that are like deconstructing hell, like this is like a go-to book. So I'm excited for it to like dig deeper into that and
Yeah.
exploring. And like for me, like I'm at this point in my life, I'm really curious about why these different stories have been passed down throughout different cultures and what their metaphorical meanings could be, and how can we apply them in ways that aren't dogmatic and can actually like make our lives better and not have to like take on a religion. Like, can we just take a little bit of everything and just learn from it? I don't know.
That is literally the most critical thinking I've ever witnessed. I'm going to keep harping on that. If you're worried about anything, it's not your critical thinking skills. That's awesome. I'm so happy for you. I feel like you've got such an old wise
Oh.
brain for such a young person's body. But yeah, like that's amazing. I think your advice is really solid, and I think your approach is really smart. I really appreciate that you keep saying like if I'm ready, when I'm ready, if it's not too much yet. You're not going out
Hmm.
there like guns blazing in a way that's going to be detrimental to your own personal healing process. I think that's really,
Hmm.
really smart. Um, Secularity says, I would suggest the works of Dr. Josh Bowen too.
Oh, okay. Add them on my
And
list.
yeah, and yeah, like I wish you all the best. I'm stoked that
Oh,
I've been
thank
able to
you.
like be a part of like your journey early on, because I know that you're just going
Oh,
to absolutely blow up. I just know that's going to happen.
oh, thank
Um,
you.
and for anybody listening, all the links to his podcast, his website, I believe the Facebook page is even in there. I think you have a link tree, right? I think I put your whole like link tree down there.
Hmm.
Um, check out Andrew's stuff. Check out Andrew's podcast. When is the Bob Jones one coming out? August, you said?
August 23rd,
August
and
23rd.
it's the first day of classes at Bob Jones University.
The pettiness, the pettiness. I love
Yeah.
that's hilarious. So August 23rd, set your alarms. His podcast is coming out about BJU, and we need to all stream it because I want it to become so popular day one that BJU thinks it's a podcast about them, and they recommend it to their students without listening to it, and then it's all just downhill from there. I really wanted to get trending so that they
No,
all listen
yeah.
to it.
I
Um,
really know. I'm really I'm basically now going on like a promotional tour, I guess you would
that's
say, because I'm I recently signed up for a little bit culty, and I've been talking with Sarah Edmondson, emailing her about it, and someone connected me with her. So I'm excited to see if that works out and talk to them about it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for your time and your story. I love that I learned so much more about you than I even knew that I
Uh,
thought that I knew before. Everybody else who joined us in the chat, thank you so much for chatting with us and asking questions and your commentary and your viewership. We couldn't do it without you. We wouldn't be here streaming if you weren't here watching it. But yeah, check out the links in the comments, and I'm sure I'll have Andrew back very soon whenever his podcast launches, and we can have a listen party on maybe
oof.
the day after or something like that.
Yeah.
But all right, bye.